Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Traverse Area Historical Society monthly program. This program concludes our spring offerings, and we will be back providing monthly programs starting back in September. Today, we are pleased to have an important part of his local history, and that is the researching for the Grand Traverse Area family. Our members informed us that they wanted to find out more about what it means to work in genealogy and to learn about how they can find more information about their own families. And that, of course, is an important part of local history. And so our presenters today are Anna Rowe Love and Linda Kelly Forward. These two individuals are important people. Linda is the president of the Grand Traverse Area Genealogical Society, and Anna is going to provide important information about her family, and that provides a case study on how you might be able to help learn more about your own family history. And so I'll turn it over to Anna and Linda. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Steve. I think I mentioned that I didn't know until last night that I would be narrating this. So, but this is Anna's family story. And there is a handout in back, and I'll review that with you after we go through the program. So, are you ready, Anna? Yeah. So some of the research ground rules that Anna has put together is always cite your sources. And that's mainly when you get into genealogy, it's if you're not at it every day, every week, or on a regular basis, it's easy to lose track of what research you've done. So if you cite all your sources, it makes it easier. Can everybody hear me okay? Number two, never assume another researcher's information is 100% correct. And I'll just tell you about my experience with this. A very short comment is I never had my family research published because I didn't feel I knew if it was accurate enough. So a cousin got it and published it, and one of my great-grandfathers, a wife that wasn't the mother of his children, that wasn't his first wife, she cited her as the mother of the family. So that kind of thing happens. So you have to be careful on that. And that goes into number three, never copy another person's public tree. But you can gather, I'd say 9 times out of 10, valuable information. And 4, don't trust your assumptions. Try to find valid sources. 5, check and double check your facts before recording or passing that information on. Take a second look at the records. Your answer might be right in front of you if you're looking at a death certificate or census or whatever. 7, don't limit yourself to only 1 or 2 research sites. There's many, many sources out there. Go offline or order hard copies to expand your research. Remember that many names have variations. Check them all. And I'll use my husband's family as an example for work. The Europeans spelling was Fuhrwerk, and it's generated into Forwerk. But also in the research, that name with a V instead of an F has come up. So those kind of things kind of make you stumble a little bit sometimes. Back up your files monthly and keep at least 2 copies of your research. And share freely with others and they will share back. And never give up. Did I cover it in? The book that Anna has noted is the genealogy standards. And I went online and I'm just going to read what it said. Family historians depend upon thousands of people unknown to them. They exchange research with others, copy information from books and databases, and write libraries, societies, and government offices. At times, they even hire professionals to do legwork in distant areas and trust strangers to solve important problems. But how can a researcher be assured that he or she is producing or receiving reliable results? This official manual from the Board of Certification for Genealogists provides a standard by which all genealogists can pattern their work. I did find the price varies on this. The one I copied is about $27. Amazon has them for $17. You can get them at Walmart for about $19. So there's different sources. If you go and just type in genealogy standards, it'll bring up several variations of the book. Okay, and so the case study for today is on the Caruthers family, which is Anna's ancestors. And starts with Samuel Caruthers, who was Anna's great-great-grandfather, and he was the first Caruthers to come to Grand Traverse County. In 1860 census, they lived in Phelps, Ontario County, New York. And with your census is a very important part of your research. That'll give the family couple, if they're both still alive, the head of the household, and then the children. And if there's anybody living with the family, it'll also give their names and it gives everybody's ages. So that's really an important tool. The 7th child of Samuel was Marshall, and he was born in New York on March 14th, 1861. And the source for that is a Michigan marriage record and a death certificate. And on those documentations, they'll list the father and the mother, and if they have it, the mother's maiden name, so, and where they were born. So that's, those are very valuable tools. And then the next slide is the 1870 census that shows that they were living in Michigan, in Lenawee County. And once again, it lists Samuel as the head of the household, his wife Harriet, and then their children, including Marshall. The last 4 children were born between 1863 and 1872 in Lenawee County. And the source was that for those, for that information was the Michigan death certificates for 3 of them and the obituary for Herbert. What brought them from New York to Michigan, and particularly this area, was land. And of course, the primary thing was timber. And after that, when the timber industry became defunct, they used the fields for farming, and the main crop was potatoes. And then I don't need to go into the Depression, but during the Depression, a lot of people lost their family farms. The lumber from this area went by rail I always thought a lot of it went to Chicago, but a lot of it went to Grand Rapids to the furniture factories. And Perry Hanna, of course, was the name that's familiar to all of you. And he was instrumental in bringing the rail line up here, up to Traverse City and Petoskey. And it came through Kingsley and Fife Lake. And that was in about 1872. And that's when those two villages were platted. And then they were incorporated in later years, but that's part of that. And then on Samuel Caruthers, this is a copy of the from the General Land Office on the homestead that he received. Now, on bounty lands, that's different than this type of homestead. On the bounty lands, that was people from the Revolutionary War up to, what did I say, 1844, something like that, for anybody that served in the military. And if they were deceased, it went to their family. They were given 40, 80, 120 acres, whatever, depending on how many years of service they had. So this is different here in Michigan. This is a land grant. And that was under Rutherford Hayes. He was our president at the time. And so Samuel Holmes, oh, yeah, sure.
What were the land grants given in relationship to the Civil War? Weren't there many settlers who were the government gave them acreage in Michigan based on their Civil War service? Am I correct in that?
Like the bounty lands, you mean?
Yes. Yes.
That I'm not sure of. I don't have an answer for you because I thought maybe it was, but I know some of my ancestors came to Springfield Township in Carruthers County. And they had like 200 acres, but he came from New York. And so I don't know how that worked.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for it. But anyway, this is what she had up on the slide was the actual land grant. And Samuel homesteaded 80 acres in Union Township, and that is east of Traverse City, out in the Fife Lake area. And so that's where he landed first in northern Michigan. They, in 1873, Sam and Harriet, plus their children, moved to a small log cabin that Sam and his older sons built from trees on the property. And that's the corner of Mayfield and Grandville, right? The first house. And so the next slide shows a census that gives you all that information on the household. And then in October of 1887, Marshall, who was one of the sons of Samuel, bought his farm from Robert Mackley. Okay, whatever you say, yeah. No relationship between the two families for $1,500. So how many acres was that? 120. 120 acres. And then in 1889, Marshall married Georgia Adele Greenman of Springfield Township, Kalkaska County. He was 28, she was 16. And the source on that is a marriage record that the books, and some of you are familiar with this type of a recording. Anyway, that's what Anna used for that. Pardon me?
That's her wedding dress.
Oh, and so she's in her wedding dress, and it's a pretty elaborate dress. Then Samuel's son-in-law, Charlie Dutton, built a family home that replaced the log cabin. This is in a different location from Marshall. Right.
Yeah, well, it's the original homestead that the 80 acres on Grand Gal and
Yeah,
Mayfield.
so it's a different spot. So by that time, all of the children except one had moved out, and you can see the farmhouse in the slide. And then the next slide is the plat map showing where Samuel's acreage was in the top right corner. And then where his son Marshall's acreage was in the lower right corner. And that's where Anna resides when she's here from Oklahoma. So, but Union Township is exactly north and contiguous to White Lake Township. By 1900, Samuel, Harriet, and Minor are living in White Lake Union Township, and once again, the census is a source on that. In the meantime, Marshall, Georgia, and their children are living just 2 miles away, as shown on the plat map. Marshall built a larger house for his growing family, and that house exists today, and that's the one Anna's living in right now. And that replaced the small house that was there when he bought the property. Now, on this census record, there's a mistake, and it probably was an honest mistake because census takers, did the best job they could. But they had 5 children, and there's only 4 listed on this census record. On May 15th, 1901, Harriet passed away from pneumonia and heart failure after suffering some kind of unknown, we don't know what, serious injury. She was buried in the Fife Lake Cemetery on May 17th, 1901. And that's a picture of Harriet and also a copy of her death certificate, which there is so much information on those certificates. It's really a valuable tool. All but one of Sam and Harriet's children attended her funeral. Ed, the second oldest, was living in California at the time, so he wasn't here. All 11 children lived to adulthood, which was kind of unusual. And that's a picture that was taken of the family members at the funeral, which is what I found in my family research is very common to have these group family pictures at the time of the funeral. Anna's grandmother, Doris Caruthers, was the 6th and youngest child of Marshall and Georgia, born on February 27th, 1902. According to stories passed down through the family, she was born in what is now the family room of the home and was premature, so they put her in a shoebox and placed her by the stove to keep her warm. And I know this kind of thing went on because my Aunt Helen told me that when she was born prematurely, they did the same thing with her. The source is a Michigan delayed birth certificate. And I think Anna and I discussed this. I think that is delayed because she was born at home. So.
Oh, and let me say, she didn't get her birth certificate until she needed a social security card. And so it was very delayed. It wasn't delayed, a few years. It was delayed then.
And I'm just gonna insert this little story. Carol Kocher was a man for Fife Lake. And he, when he got his social security, he found out he was a year older than he thought he was because he'd been farmed out to another family and that type of thing. So that happens. And then there's the next slide has more census information on Samuel Caruthers and then Marshall at the bottom is on. Samuel Caruthers died on September 19th, 1911 at the age of 86. His cause of death was listed as congestion of liver and stomach. He was buried next to his wife Harriet in the Fife Lake Cemetery on September 20th, 1911. And there's a death certificate plus a permit for burial or removal. And another thing that they have is, if, like my, great uncle died in Royal Oak, and, they had to transport him up here for burial, and that record I have. So those kinds of records are usually in the township that owns the cemetery. Marshall's daughter Stella married Leroy DeLorma Ray Hackett in Flint, Michigan on November 12, 1916. A son, DeLorma, was born on July 16, 1917. Stella contracted TB in early 1918, which seemed pretty prevalent back in that time frame. Roy brought his wife and son to her parents, where they set up a tent in the front yard to care for her, probably because of the isolation. Unfortunately, Stella died on August 3rd in 1918. Her son was raised by his grandparents. And I think that's a death, yeah. That's a death certificate plus her picture. This is a picture of Marshall and Caruthers, Georgia Caruthers, and their surviving children standing outside the farmhouse. It was taken after Stella's burial at Fife Lake Cemetery, which goes right along with what I said. That's when they take pictures. On August 25th, 1925, Doris Caruthers married Harmon Rowerdink in Grand Rapids, Kent County, Michigan. Their mothers were the witnesses for the marriage, which is kind of neat, but it's kind of unusual too. So that's a picture of them, and also the census. Now, Doris had lived up here, and the family was not wealthy by any means. And she did not want to have the rest of her life in poverty, be in poverty. So she and a friend took off and went to Grand Rapids and found a job. And her first job was as a seamstress, which they didn't know anything about. So that only lasted a couple of days. And then Harmon, he had what was his business?
Well, it started as
Some kind of a factory.
repairing things for automobiles. But today, Rowerdink Incorporated is a multi-million-dollar car parts distributor based in Grand Rapids.
So Harmon, I think, was quite a catch, and Doris took his eye, and we got married. So she did pretty good. She got herself out of poverty. The next slide is in 1930, Marshall, Georgia, and Alfred Caruthers, along with Stella's son, were living at the farm in Union Township in Grand Traverse County. And that's validated by the census record. And then Harmon, Doris, their son Wayne, and Harmon's mother were living in Grand Rapids, and that's validated by the other census record. On October 31st, 1939, Alfred, who was a brother to Doris, married Flossie Mae Willoughby. And she and her three daughters moved into the farm, and that's a copy of their marriage license. And then on December 1st or 26th, 1939, about 2 a.m., Marshall Caruthers died of shock after an accident and where he incurred injuries. He is buried in Fife Lake Cemetery, and that burial took place December 28, 1939. And there's a copy of his death certificate and his obituary. And then, as you can see, Anna's bringing her family forward. In 1940, Alfred, Flossie, and their 3 daughters were living at the farm. Georgia was living with them and also living in Grand Rapids. In other words, she had 2 homes with her daughter Doris and family during colder weather due to debilitating, thank you, rheumatoid arthritis. And once again, the census record is there. Carmen, Doris, and their children were living in Grand Rapids in Kent County. Am I repeating that, or those are separate people? And there's another census record here. On August 12, 1948, Alfred Carruthers died in Cadillac following an emergency appendectomy. And this is a picture from 1947 of Alfred and Flossie with their daughter at the farm. That's your place. An untimely visit to the farm by Doris and Georgia. And they were there to check on Flossie to make sure she was doing all right following her husband's death. According to Doris, Flossie was having a tryst with a neighbor, and that was right after the funeral. Something she and her mother found unacceptable since Alfred had only recently died. Doris, who was also on the deed for the farm, told Flossie she needed to move out. What issued was quite a battle. Doris filed papers to have Flossie evicted. Flossie took that to the appellate court and the decision was overturned. Doris then took, did I miss something?
No, that's right.
Okay. Oh, and this took the judgment against her to the appellate court and the decision was overturned. Doris then took the case to the Supreme Court, who upheld the original decision. Before moving, Flossie, who was really upset about this, smashed the plaster from the walls and sold or took a number of family belongings. Unfortunately, Georgia passed away on July 16, 1950, so she was not alive to hear the final decision from the Supreme Court. And then you've got a slide on figures of home.
Oh, no.
And there was an article about it in the Detroit Free Press. The farm became a place where the family spent their summers. Carmen and Doris and Wayne and Joni. Wayne and Joni are Anna's parents, both school teachers, and their children closed both of their homes in Grand Rapids and moved to Pike Lake from June through August each summer. Living as a multi-generational family gave Anna a deep appreciation for the history of her family. Doris transferred the ownership of the farm to her son Wayne on July 15, 1974. When Wayne and Joni retired, they moved to the family farm from mid-April through mid-October each year. On October 25th, 1995, the farm was certified as a Michigan Centennial Farm, having been in the same family for over 100 years. And there's a documentation, a little newspaper article on that. Anna became the owner of the farm on July 29th, 2019, following in her parents' footsteps. Excuse me. She resides at the farm about 6 months of the year. Excuse me. What we're asking her. Spending much of her time doing genealogical research and working on cemetery records for GTAGs. And that's burials in Grand Traverse and Leelanau counties. Anna has been on the board of GTAG since 2017, serving as cemetery chair, research chair, and co-webmaster. Anna went out to the site of Sam Caruthers' original land. And some of the things that she noted, which are part of research on old farms, you can look for lilacs, apple trees, that type of thing, and maybe an old foundation if you get lucky, maybe a barn. The resources used for this presentation was interviews with family members, family stories, family documents, family pictures, the clerk's office for marriage and death records, certificates, register of deeds for property records, cemetery records, burial permits, land grant, which you saw, Ancestry.com, Census Records, FamilySearch.org, Census Records, and Newspapers.com, newspaper articles and obituaries. And this is Ann's full mug. God grant me the serenity to accept the ancestors I cannot find, the courage to find the ones I can, and the wisdom to document thoroughly. And so I want to thank Anna for all her hard work on this, putting this together, this type of research on her family. And Anna, would you like to add anything and then take any questions before I go over this other list? Does anybody have any? Yes.
I noticed you had quite a few photographs. Had your family saved those, or did you have to research into like libraries and places like that to uncover them?
I'm extremely lucky that I live on Marshall's farm.
Right.
Now, the funny thing about when Flossie left was, I said to my dad, didn't she break the windows of the house? No, she only smashed the plaster. And I said, she would have done a lot more damage had she broken the windows. Weather could get in, animals could get in. Lord knows, I'm living in a over 100-year-old building this year, first year ever. I've had, and I just had pest control at the house. Milk snakes, 3 milk snakes in my house. And I also suffer from rheumatoid arthritis. I think I could have gotten a 10 maybe for the score from jumping up on my couch and over the back after putting my foot down, and the snake slithered out from underneath my dad's toy box from when he was a child. So it's been a huge part of our family. I lived at the farm on summers. My grandmother and my mom would sit at the kitchen table and drink coffee and talk about my Aunt Dude. And my Aunt Dude married Hiram LaBar, who was fairly
Prominent entrepreneur.
in White Lake. So I would listen to these stories. I was an only granddaughter. My grandpa would take me out and drive me around on these dirt roads and tell me stories of his childhood, which is a whole nother wild story. And I've actually written a story about 10 years, a decade of loss, which I'm named after his mother. She married this wealthy businessman in Nebraska, and in the stretch of 10 years, lost her parents, his parents, her husband, and 3 daughters.
Any other questions?
Can I ask, does someone else have a question?
I have a question regarding, you didn't talk about it. Did you do any research into Civil War service for these individuals? Or
Samuel
and
was
would do that?
registered for the Civil War, but did not participate in the war. So I think, having a number of children maybe, because Civil War would be the 1860s, and he would have been in New York with 4 or 5 children at the time. So possibly that's why he didn't participate in the war. I don't know.
Was Flossie your grandmother then, or?
No, my grandmother was Doris.
Okay,
Her sister-in-law was Flossie. Her brother was Alfred. the
Okay,
man that
I
passed
lost track.
away. And
um,
And so my grandma and her mother went to check on her, make sure she was doing okay, and then catch her with this neighbor. And my grandma was obviously furious, and apparently stayed furious for a long time because the ruling from the Supreme Court was in 1952, I believe, and he passed in 49, I think, so. Yeah, she held a grudge.
well, reasonably so, and it's just, I have a history background, and when I talk to people about researching their family history, it's like you never know what you might run into, and you've got to be open to interesting facts popping up.
Yes, yes, most definitely.
Sharon,
In your first slide, you talked about backing up your research. I've often wondered, and I've got everything on ancestry.com, but when I stop paying for that and I'm gone, what's gonna happen to all that information? How does that
Well,
work?
Nothing goes, even if you don't pay for your membership at Ancestry, they never get rid of the data. So you can come back 5 years later and it's still there.
There's no way I'm not techie, I don't know how to do all this stuff. There's no way I can back up that information that I put in that ancestry. Put it on some kind of file or something because that.
Oh, is that the only place you have it as Ancestry? Part of what I'm referencing is about 12 years ago, my home in Oklahoma burnt to the ground. And it was devastating because I am my family's historian. And so I lost, my grandma's, my great grandma's wedding rings, just lots of birth certificates, death certificates. And you don't really think about, how many, at $10 a pop, or I don't know what they cost today, but I had to replace all that stuff. And then I keep a paper copy as well as, so I have actually books of information about my family.
Right, well, I have files for everybody, but the actual, stuff that's online, there's just so much. But there's no way of taking that information away from that.
Well, there is, before you leave Ancestry, you can make a JEDCOM file. And you can actually look up how to do that on Ancestry site. And then store that on a thumb drive and what I would suggest is that you keep your copies in multiple places so that, that was a good thing, what was,
What kind of drawing?
flash drive, just a little.
Flash. But I
Sure.
thought there was
And
something.
there was a death drive or something. What was you?
Yeah, you can create, on Ancestor, you could create a.
Oh, JEDCOM. So,
I'm sure Catherine at the library here knows how to do that.
I was gonna say, where can you go to get help?
Yeah, we have ancestry here, so I'm sure Catherine knows how to do that, and she'd be able to help you sometime. She's one of the reference libraries.
Okay, great, thank you.
The JIDCOM is what? Define that again, please.
it is a way that you can load the file and any kind of, like if you, what is the software you use? Family Tree Maker. You could load it then into Family Tree Maker. If you had legacy family, well, that may be legacy family. If you had Roots Web, if you had, there are all these different companies, they all will take a GEDCOM file. It's kind of the universal language of family trees.
Any more questions? Okay, I'm gonna briefly go over the handout for doing research, and you start with talking to your family. And I used to sit and listen to my aunts talk about things in Pike Lake and when they were kids and blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, I didn't document it. You interview the family members to gather what information you can. And the family stories, family documents, family pictures, and hopefully my mother always said, you write the date and everybody's names on the back of the picture. And she's gone now, and I've been going through all these pictures. She was very good at that. I don't know that I always was. And some of them I'm old enough that I'm not quite sure when picture was taken or whatever. G-Tags is another resource, and their annual individual membership fee is $20. They meet the fourth Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. Do I have that? I'm sorry, that's wrong on the flyer. That should be 1 p.m. here in this room. And don't ask me why I have Tattle seat flyer, because I don't have a flyer. So that you cross that off. I went up into the area where all the old historical records are kept, and this is what I came up with. There's all the stacks with the research books, mostly Michigan, but also quite a bit on northeastern United States, mainly Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Virginia, and Massachusetts. There are a few more. Canada, Quebec, and Ontario. Passenger ship records. Cemetery records, and especially in these two counties right here. And old newspapers. The county courthouse records, the clerk's office, and I've given you the phone number. You can access birth records 100 years old, over 100 years old. Marriage records and death records. Now, like my great uncle Nat that died in Royal Oak, because he was buried up here, they had to file a death certificate. So if somebody dies out of state or downstate or wherever, they will have to file that death certificate with the county clerk in order to be buried in a cemetery in the county. Probate, I talked to the gal at probate in Grand Traverse County. There's a number for them. She said, everybody does not file their wills. And they don't really like to have, like with my will, if I took it there, they just put it in a file someplace, because they really don't encourage that. But if somebody dies, it's better for you to file the will. Now, when my mother passed, I didn't file her will. So that's kind of sporadic. The Register of Deeds is really has a lot of land information, and you have to follow it back or know what time frame. And I've looked through those records, those huge books, many times down there. Now the newer land items are digitized, and they can pull it up right there at the front desk. They're very helpful at Register of Deeds. Township records. Many of the cemeteries are owned by townships, and they have copies of death certificates, burial locations, family lots, graves, many times maps with the family lots on them, burial permits, and like I said, with my Uncle Nat transporting his body up here, they have that permit. Then the church records, They have membership records, baptisms, marriages, deaths, and then, of course, there's Catholic cemeteries. In Fife Lake Village, we have a Catholic cemetery, and that's a whole separate set of records. But sometimes those records, like the death certificates, are also in the township records. Then you have your newspapers, you have obituaries, and any articles containing family members, many times are there. Then the genealogy groups, and I found this in my Ohio research, many of them do this by county, and that was Noble County and Mercer County. My family, Noble County, my husband's family, Mercer County. They publish newsletters. They have cemetery publications. Usually it's a 8.5 by 11 book with a binder on it. And that's really valuable information. History records, of course, the Census Records, which is an outstanding tool for research. I listed the Kalkaska Genealogy Society. Don Triplett is the president, and the time they meet. This coming Saturday, they're meeting on church records. And I'm going to try to go to that because I don't know too much about exploring church records. I think it's different for the Catholic Church versus the other churches. I know when I went to Quebec to do family search, I was going to get a hold of anybody at that Catholic church. So,
Well, the records would be at the diocese, not at the church.
okay, but I couldn't even find that, where the diocese was. So the Leelanau Historical Society, they have a website and their number. And I'm sorry, Steve, I don't have yours on here. I just realized that. The Library of Michigan is another valuable tool. There's a website, you can get a library card, and they have many of their presentations scheduled as Zoom. I have gone to that library. It's a beautiful facility if you haven't been there. If you're, and I'll just note this for you, if you are researching any Vietnam material, there is between the Hall of Justice and the library in Lansing, there is a Vietnam memorial. And I've been there several times. When they had the dedication ceremony, I happened to go. My sister's husband's brother was a Green Beret, and he was killed in Nam, and some of the guys I went to school with were killed there. And it was a beautiful ceremony. I don't think a lot of people realize that Michigan has this display down there. It's all the names by county of those who died in Vietnam. And if you haven't been there, I suggest you go. It's right downtown in Lansing. Allen County Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana has a ton of information. And so I've given you their phone number and their email. The National Genealogy Society, it's in Falls Church, Virginia. I really don't know too much about it, but there's their phone number. The Smithsonian Institute, I know somebody was doing research on the Aldrich family, which is my dad's side. They found one of the Aldriches through that source, through the Smithsonian. I don't know how, but in Canada, it's a little different than the United States, but Canada, many of our ancestors came from Canada. And I found this out when I went to Quebec with my sister. I was talking to my cousin about it. I said, well, we're going up through North Bay and then down to Calumet Island. That was our destination. And she said, well, that's where the Scapaturas are. That was her husband, Vincent Scapatura. And I said, you guys told us they were from New York. She said, no, that's where they came originally. So Mary and I found out where the Catholic cemetery was, and we went there and we found their monuments, their grave sites. And so that's kind of fun. You just kind of stumble into some of this stuff. The immigration courts, and many times they came in family groups or church groups possibly. And something I learned, especially with Ohio, with the west side of Ohio where Mercer County is, many people came to the United States and then tried to locate in an area that was very similar to the area they came from. And my husband's family came from Prussia, from Germany, basically. And they ended up in Mercer County, and that's a heavy farming community. So sure, that was one of the reasons they came to that area. And then the county of immigration, the port, if you can find that out, it doesn't always mean that's where they came from, where they lived. So that can be a little confusing. My only experience with passenger ship records was when I went to Allen County Library, and I didn't know anything about them, and it was overwhelming. So any research you can do ahead of time before you go to that documentation is helpful. And then I just listed the references. Of course, Find a Grave, is a wonderful tool, but they don't have every headstone. The National Archives, Library of Congress, the bounty land warrants, on and on. In my family tree, which I'm also a member of Ancestry, when you pull the family up, if they have a little leaf next to it, that's hints. And I just found this out last year when I was doing some research. And that'll pop up other people's research and connections, and it's kind of fascinating if you're not aware of it. So let's see. Some of these I've used, and some of them I haven't. Of course, Latter-day Saints is wonderful because they research 5 generations back. And so they have all this information that might be right there, and you don't have to work at it so hard. The same thing is true with Native Americans. To become a member of the Grand Traverse Band, you have to go back 5 years. So yeah, that's what B told me, right?
5 years.
Or generations, I'm sorry. Yeah. And then I just ran this off today. This is just a sheet from my husband's family group. And there'd be many sheets going back, but don't give up on this. No, I'll just share a little story on my husband's mother. Her maiden name was Rice. And the story was that her dad died in Minnesota. He was did plastering. And so Jim and I could never find anything on that, but the Rice family farm was in Ohio. Well, I finally on the Find a Grave, found his headstone, and he is buried out there in Minnesota. But he died at a younger age, and there were 4 children. And I don't know everything about it, but Jim's mother was the youngest, and she was adopted twice. So it really adds to the confusion in the names. And then when we went to Ohio to do research the first time, where they had the records had flooded. And so it was a mess. Well, when we went back, I don't know, 8 years later or whatever, they had all the records indexed and everything. So that was fun because we found a lot of information. And of course, we went to the health department, we went to the courthouse, and to the clerk's place. And then Jim's great aunt, Aunt Emma, he would get her in the truck with us, and we go to all the family cemeteries. And that is such a valuable tool. And they're very different parts of the family history. The people are buried in like 4 or 5 different cemeteries. So don't think they're all located like over here at Oakwood or whatever, because that's not necessarily true. So that's my follow-up on that. So does anybody have any questions that I can answer on this handout? Or ask Anna any more questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So for the audience, let's give my presentation. And thank you very much. Very, very helpful in terms of trying to better understand how so many sources are available to us. And I really appreciate the comments at the very beginning of never give up, because that is, it does take some time to find some of these sources. And but in terms of the research, the best you can hope for is have that some family historian that has kept that information, and that's invaluable. So thank you all very much. For the Traverse Area Historical Society, I just want to point out to everyone who's watching that our summer tour schedule will begin on June the 25th with the Oakwood Cemetery. And so if you are interested, we will, from the 25th on, we will be having tours on Sundays for the 2nd and 4th Sundays of each month through into October. So please take a look at that. That information will be on our website. Thank you all very much for watching.
And you said the 2nd and 4th Sunday
Yes.
of each month.
And it's 4 o'clock. That
I
will be on the website. I think it is maybe either 2 to 4 or 4 to 6. It's a 2-hour tour.
But it doesn't start till the last 4th weekend of June.
Correct.
And then it's the 2nd and 4th, July, August, September, into October.
Right.
It's GD on what you said. Society.
So thank you so very much.
Oh,
It
you're
was so
welcome.
very interesting.